A wide gulf separates the one who judges from the one upon whom judgment is passed. The conscious intentions and motives of the one passing judgment are received and experienced as something much different by the one upon whom the judgment is made. Someone may make a judgment, a criticism, a condemnation out of a desire to help the other person. He sees something which is wrong in the life of the other person, something which needs to be corrected, something which needs to be changed. What a better person he would be if he would only do this. And so this is pointed out to him. The judgment is made. And yet it is received, it is experienced rather as the self-righteousness of the other person. It is experienced as the other person trying to get you to be the type person with whom he will feel comfortable. Not really to help you, but to make you into the type person which he would like to see you be. And often, beneath the conscious intentions and motives of the person making the judgment, the criticism, what actually is happening, and what happens so many times, is that he hates in the other person the thing which he hates in himself, the thing which he unconsciously hates in himself. And then a thin wall begins to separate my own perception of my sin. A thin wall separates that from my condemnation and criticism and judgment of the sin as I see it in my neighbor, as I see it in the other person. I feel that something is wrong within me, and so rather than look at the wrong which is within me, I find a wrong in my neighbor, and I gloat over it, and I magnify it, and I judge it. And again, this comes through to the person being judged as something very unjust. He feels being subjected merely to the whims, the desires of the person passing judgment, the egoism, the Pharisaism of the person passing judgment. I am subjected not to some objective standard of right and wrong, but rather in a very unjust way. I am subjected to what he likes and what he dislikes. Well, the judgment passed then, the judgment passed in kindness and friendliness, in the attempt to help the other person, to draw you closer to him and him closer to you. The judgment passed with these intentions and desires ends up having exactly the opposite effect, that it serves more to widen the gulf which already exists. It divides you even more from the other person. The actual effect which the judgment has, that of destroying the relationships which you have with the other person. All possibility of an openness, a sharing with each other are destroyed. For the other person immediately goes on the defensive to hide those parts of his life which he feels that you may judge. And the person passing the judgment hides those parts of his life which he doesn't want to consciously recognize and look at. Impossible for him to be open with the other person because he's not even open with himself. And impossible for the other person to be open with you because he must hide that which you might criticize. And so the gulf widens, the division increases. And the effect which it has is that the person passing judgment creates a matrix, an environment of judging. Judgment can elicit only judgment in response. An atmosphere of retaliation and retribution, a vicious circle created, where judgment elicits judgment, followed again by judgment, caught up in a continual cycle of judgment and criticism and defense with one another. Soren Kierkegaard tells the story of a man who stole $1,000 from someone. And this thief, after he had stolen the $1,000, is met by another person, a swindler, and the swindler swindles him out of the $1,000 he had just stole. The thief wasn't going to put up with this, so immediately he hauls the swindler into court. And as they both stand before the judge asks the embarrassing question of the thief, Where did you get the $1,000? So both are thrown into jail. Judgment passed upon both. Judgment upon one resulting in the response of judgment upon you. Well, it seems that what Jesus has actually done is that he comes along and breaks this vicious, unending cycle of judgment followed by judgment followed by judgment. Recall the story of one day a crowd of people bringing a woman to Jesus, a woman caught in adultery. No question about her sin. She was guilty. And the customary thing, stone her to death. So they bring her to Jesus and say, now, what are you going to do with this woman? And Jesus very quietly and calmly responds, let him who is without sin cast the first stone. And the crowd quietly disappears. The vicious cycle of judgment broken and replaced with a new cycle of mercy and forgiveness and love. You see, then this means that we have the choice. We can either continue to create and participate in a cycle of judging, our passing judgment on others and others judging us, or we can now create and participate in a cycle of mercy and forgiveness and love, drawing others closer to us and drawing ourselves closer to others. The choice, you see, then becomes ours. Recall the parable which Jesus tells of the servant who owed his master $1 million, over $1 million. And the master calls him in and demands payment of this money. And the man responds, well, I couldn't possibly pay you. And the master says, okay, we'll sell you and your wife and your children and at least get some return on this bad debt. And the servant begs for mercy. And the master, in response, forgives him, has mercy upon him, frees him from this debt. And the servant then goes out. The cycle of judgment broken is now participating in a new cycle of mercy and love and forgiveness. The servant then goes out and meets an old friend on the street who owes him a few dollars, some $20. And he demands that his friend pay him that $20 right now. And his friend, unable to pay it. So the man has him thrown into jail. You recall how the story ends. The master calls his servant back in and asks him if this is right, if he has done this. Yes. And so he has him thrown into jail. We have the choice either to participate and continue to develop a cycle of mercy and forgiveness or love, or we can create and participate in a cycle of judging and separation from each other. The choice is ours. This is the choice, it seems to me, which Jesus brings to us. Well, certainly there's the danger that we will hear and interpret and treat these words of Jesus in the wrong manner. To many, how appealing it is to hear now that no longer should you make judgments. For many of us, it's very difficult to make hard decisions. We just as soon not commit ourselves to one line of action, because once we commit ourselves to one line of action in a positive way, this means that we are committed in a negative way to another line, to fight against another line. How easy it is to avoid making commitments and decisions, to making judgments between what is right and wrong, what is righteous and what is unrighteous, what is good, what is bad. But certainly Jesus is not giving us an out for avoiding commitment and avoiding decision and avoiding working for what is right and righteous. You know, Jesus himself was a radical about good and evil. And whenever he saw human freedom and human rights threatened in any way, he was committed. He made a judgment on the situation and he acted. He went into the temple and saw that men were prohibited from having free access to God. Their freedom was denied, so he overturned the tables of the money changers and drove out those who were buying and selling in the temple. He was committed. He made judgments when he was confronted with situations which threatened human freedom. And certainly our judicial systems, we cannot replace judgments entirely with mercy. Mercy can temper our judgments and our vengeance. But still, we are called upon in life to make judgments, to make commitments, to make decisions. And now we reach a crucial point. We cannot live without making judgments. And so what do? We can say that, we can listen to these words of Jesus. Yes, we shouldn't be making judgments on one another. We shouldn't be doing these things which cut us off from other people. But life demands these things of us. So we go back living the way we always have lived, making judgments, making criticisms, condemnations, under the pretense that this is the way life has to be. What does it all add up to? I think the crucial question for us is what image, finally, what overriding image do we have of a Christian? Yes, a Christian is one who, as Jesus, more or less carries a lantern around, seeking out evil, seeking out those things which deny the rights and freedom and humanness of other people. He's committed to destroying these things. Jesus certainly condemned these things. He was a social reformer. He made judgments. But first of all, the image which I think we have of a Christian, rather than being this social reformer committed to certain things, the image we have first of all of a Christian is one who lives his life before God. One who lives his life not before his neighbor or the crowds, but lives his life before God, aware that he is living not in the eyes of the man next to him, but he's living first of all in the eyes of God. Someone tells a story of running across a football team which had an incredible record of a winning streak. Week after week, they could go out onto the field and win their game under tremendous pressure. And against tremendous odds, they could win their game week after week. Yes, they were in top physical condition. They were good players. They trained well. And yet this person was curious as to what always made the difference when they got on the field. Why were they able to continue under tremendous pressure in this winning streak? And he finally discovered what he thought was the answer. He realized that each Monday, all the players and all the coaches came together and they watched the films of the previous game. And it suddenly dawned on him that those players out on the field were not playing for the crowds. They were not playing for the reporters and the writers, but rather they were playing for the coaches. They knew that they could make a tremendous blunder out on the field and it not even be perceived by the crowd or the writers, but they knew that it would be perceived by the coaches. They knew that the coaches could see beyond the surface level of things. And they were playing for the coaches, before the coaches, in the eyes of the coaches, and not the crowds. Well, it seems that, likewise, we live our lives before God, not before our neighbors, not before the other man, but we live our lives first, last, and always before God. You see how easy it is to be a righteous, a pure person in the eyes of our neighbors, having acted all the right ways. How easy it is to fool our neighbors. And yet we know that we cannot fool the one who sees beyond the surface levels. We know that the motives, the attitudes, the feelings, the hatreds which are beneath cannot be hidden. Our neighbor may not see them, but as we stand before God, they are perceived, they are discovered, and all our pretenses of self-righteousness are broken and destroyed. And I think that right here is something which is distinctive about Christianity and about our lives as we live them as part of the church, as Christians. We're not interested simply in external acts, in doing good things, and in living, quotes, good lives. But rather we are interested always in the internal hidden motives and attitudes. No, we're not guilty of murder. But as Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount in a previous passage says, that murder really is not the all-important thing. That the man who has the hatred within his heart is just as guilty. Christian lives as one aware that the internal motives, the dark attitudes and feelings, the sinful evil deep within him is there and is seen as he stands before God and is known by him as he lives his life. And thus this man looks at his neighbor, and he sees his neighbor doing something overtly which he can condemn. And yet at the same time, he knows that deep within his own life, the same thing is found, the same sin, the same fault is there in his life. And how can I possibly condemn that which my neighbor is doing without also condemning that which is within my life? No, all judgments are not eliminated. But now it is impossible for me to occupy some detached throne of judgment where I look down and pass judgment on all those poor people. But rather, my eyes are open to what is within my own life. And I know that what is within my own life is not hidden, even though my neighbor may not see it. It still is there as I live my life before God. And thus, the gulf which separates me from my neighbor, the division which separates me, is overcome, is broken down, broken through. For I now know that I share the same humanity. I participate in the same struggles. I have the same faults as my neighbor has. Christ replaced the cycle of divisive judgment with a cycle of mercy and forgiveness and love. A cycle which binds me to my brother as both of us stand before God, aware of the sin, the faults, the evil within our lives. The cycle which enables me to give restoring forgiveness and mercy to my brother. It enables me to seek the restoring forgiveness and mercy from my brother. It enables both of us to receive mercy and forgiveness as we stand together before God.